RMC is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your retro gaming with their joysticks featuring genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery.
Hello Cave Dwellers, welcome to the cave for the mystery box episode. Yes, this box has come all the way from Japan. It took 3 months to get here owing to the weight of it. I chose the slowest and cheapest shipping service, so that was by boat. And what's inside is a PC. That's just about all I can tell you about it. It's not a PC I've worked on before, and it's not a model I'm familiar with. And as you'll see, as I start to tear it down, it's quite an interesting PC with some interesting quirks, perhaps specific to Fujitsu, perhaps specific to workstation grade PCs. I'm not sure, and I'm depending a lot on your feedback on this one. It may turn into a trash to treasure because it's not in a great state, but I need to know more information about it. So I'm going to share with you my findings as I take it apart today. And I'm appealing to you guys, if you see anything interesting, anything that you recognize, if you've worked on this machine before, please, please, please leave a comment. Help us all to learn a little bit more about it. And maybe you can fill in those missing knowledge gaps that I need to fill if I'm ever going to get this working and if I'm ever going to restore it to its full glory. There's some interesting bits and challenges that we really need to get around if we're ever going to see this working. So I'm sure you'll want to see what it is. Let's take it out of the box, let's tear it to pieces, and let's see what our mystery Japanese PC is all about.
At over 7 kilograms, this is a lot heavier than it looks, and it's also filthy. The gloves will definitely be on for this one. The first thing I noticed about this is those striking decals. It looks to me like something you'd see doing donuts in the local car park. A Civic Type R or a Ford Escort XR3i both spring to mind. It tells us very loudly then that this is a Fujitsu FMR 70HL1. Which leaves me none the wiser as to what it is, but Fujitsu also make the FM Towns computer, and the FM on that model stands for Fujitsu Micro, so I think we can safely guess it means the same here. And a bit of internet detective work says that the R70 model was released in '88, but nothing of the HL1. But let's have a poke around and see what we find. Quite unusually for a PC of the time, we have two 5¼ inch floppy drives and a 3½ inch floppy drive. And a hard disk which is labelled as a 40 megabyte model. This thing is ready to eat up your floppy disks. On the front there's also a reset switch, a keyboard port at a jaunty angle, and that's not a PS2 port, it's got 8 pins, and a volume knob which I'm assuming is for a PC speaker in the same way that the Amstrad 1512 we recently saw has a PC speaker control, because I don't see any audio output ports on this thing. There's also a power button on the right hand side of the front fascia. Let's take a look around the back of the machine, and I'll warn you in advance, it's really not pretty back there. Quite obviously, I think this was consigned to the scrap heap. A chainsaw massacre has taken place straight through all of the cables, including any peripherals attached to the machine at the time. Why? Well, I can only assume it was to save time. Perhaps this went through a recycling facility of some sort, and whoever dealt with it must have had 3 seconds to cut those cables and move on to the next device. And some damage has been done in the process. The 2 rightmost ports are expansion cards and one has been battered. It really shouldn't be at this angle. But whatever it is, it's got a 50-pin interface, and we'll see if we can get any more details on that when we take a look inside. There's also a selection of built-in ports, and this is quite useful. There's a SCSI terminator left attached, so we can make good use of that if I just go ahead and carefully unclip it. Damn. Thankfully that was just the brittle outer casing. I'm sure this will be fine. Maybe a bit of 3D printing or a bit of hot glue will sort that out, and you'll never be able to tell, I promise. The onboard ports then include that SCSI port, and that suggests that this is a machine designed for serious business use. There's also an external floppy drive because, of course, 3 internal floppy drives might not be enough for you, an RS-232C port and a Centronic-style printer port. It's a nice and very serious looking collection of ports. But you may be wondering where we plug our display, and if you look over to the left here, underneath the power supply, there's a port marked CRT. And this looks to me like a potential sticking point. It's a 28 pin port, which I definitely don't have an adapter or a monitor for. So any ideas on this one, guys? What kind of port is this? What kind of monitor do we need? Is there indeed an adapter to maybe convert this to VGA? We'll need to overcome that if we're ever to see it work. Despite all the go faster stripes on the outside of the case then, this is a serious business machine, and that's confirmed by the details over at the IPSJ Computer Museum website, which tells us there were initially 3 R models released in 1987, and the R stood for Refresh or Revolution, and it was Fujitsu's flagship business PC range. The FMR 70 gets a mention as being a high-end model, and it would remain their premium PC until a new range came out in 1993. There's still no specific mention of our HL1 variant, but promisingly it does say that the R70 range is fully MS-DOS compatible. Inside the case, the initial impressions are actually good. It certainly looks a lot tidier than the outside. Those 2 massive floppy drives dominate much of the space, as does the power supply unit at the back, and that might all explain the positioning of a familiar component. Tucked down here in the corner is an Intel 386 processor. It's passively cooled but positioned so that it has space to let it breathe around it and it's not crammed under all of those disk drives. The part number reveals that this is a 386DX processor and it's running at 20 MHz. That's faster than the 16 MHz of the standard R70s. So I'm starting to think that the HL1 model is a later, slightly faster revision of the original R70. The expansion cards are of course an added bonus, but we'll get them out of the way because I want to strip this back to the bare bones machine. Removal is completely toolless, the cards just yank out, and another sign of the higher class nature of this machine can be seen in the expansion ports. This card is a TexNI interface card. I've never heard of it either, and you can see there's a white or greyish connector, and this conforms to the DIN 41612 standard. In this example there are 3 rows of 96 gold pins, and they were commonly used in rack-mounted or more industrial systems, and we'll see these throughout the machine as we tear it down. No ISA expansion cards are an option for us then, and that may prove to be very limiting in what upgrades we could put in this machine. I certainly don't think I've ever seen a 96-pin Sound Blaster card. The second expansion card in the machine is Fujitsu branded and may well be standard for this HL1 model. It has a Centronic style port at the rear, it's covered in 7000 series logic, and it has an NEC IC, which is a general purpose interface bus adapter. So I think this is just another port which complements the onboard printer port, great for businesses with multiple local printers or peripherals. With the cards out of the machine then, I wanted to have a quick look for the destroyer of machines, the battery. And sure enough, we have a big voucher battery located on the reset switch and volume assembly here, positioned with excellent precision so that the ribbon cable can catch any leaks from the battery above it and slowly disintegrate. Thankfully it hasn't reached this stage yet, but we will remove the assembly and let's get that battery out before it causes any damage. The next thing we take out is the PSU, followed by a cooling fan for the PSU, which looks like it has some luxurious vibration and sound dampening foam around it. But over time, that's just turned into brown dust. Yuck. The deeper we dive into this, the more obvious it is that this was made for easy maintenance and upgrading. We had 2 thumb screws to open the case, toolless expansion cards, and now the disk drives just slide in and out. So if we wanted to replace a disk drive at any point, we could do so without ever once using a screwdriver, and I like that a lot. The 5¼ inch drives are housed in caddies to fit the machine perfectly, but it gives no clues away as to whether they are low 360K or high 1.2 MB density disks. I'd hazard a guess at them being the higher capacity drives based on the build of the machine and the period in which it was released. Again, this is something I'd hopefully like to find out further down the line. With our top layer of drives removed, it reveals 2 more. On the right here we have a 40 MB hard drive with a very satisfying dial on the top. This must be used to set the device ID on the SCSI bus, and it's far better than fiddly jumpers. Very satisfying to click. Once again, they slide out with no tools required, and then the backplane pops out of the system board and it uses that same 96-pin DIN connector that we saw before. If we pop open the hard drive caddy, it does appear to be the original Fujitsu drive, sitting in a puddle of orange gloop. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to have made its way onto the PCB, and it's just crept into the power connector, but it should clean up fine. If we don't get the machine going, maybe we can plug this into another machine and see if we can retrieve any data. Now we can remove the plastic shroud, and with that out the way, it's really starting to look more like a regular PC. And we can now remove the onboard ports, and with a flick of the wrist they pop out, and again it's that same DIN connector. So far so good, and if you've seen anything of interest while I've been tearing this apart, please do leave a comment so that we might all learn a little more about the machine. Inside the case we've got signs of corrosion and more signs of water damage, and that's also evident on the system board unfortunately. On the back of the board it's mostly isolated to the mounting points, but there's also one component which has taken the brunt of it here. And there are various watermarks or rust spots dotted around the board. While I said this was a preliminary exploration of the machine for a potential trash to treasure, well, this kind of thing will bug me if I don't fix it, so we will clean it up shortly. It's a nicely built machine then, as you'll probably agree. It's accessible, it's easy to service and find your way around. All of the key components of the machine are on the system board, so we can do away with all the non-essential parts to try and get that running. So no disk drives or hard drive, no backplane or rear ports, no case, and no fan. All we need is the board, the power supply and the power switch. Still no sign of a speaker though, so I'm not entirely sure what that volume control is for. We've established that this is a 386 based system, and on board we can also see 2 clusters of RAM. This is DRAM in an inline package and is divided up between system and video memory. 584 kilobytes of RAM is standard on this model, with up to 10 megabytes of extended RAM. At least that's on the standard R70 model. Counting up all the modules, we have 40 in total of various vendors and part numbers. Could we have a whopping 10 megabytes on board split between those duties? It looks like it could be that way based on the part numbers, but I'm still trying to track some of them down to confirm that, so proof will be in the booting. And our system board is a sea of Fujitsu branded chips, from digital to analog converters to the onboard peripheral interface chip. And if we're to progress with this repair, then I will try and find out a bit more. I'd particularly like to know what video chip is on board here, but I'm unable to find out what that is currently. Many of them are dated 1991, which lines up with the idea that this is a later model in the series. So there are still many mysteries to be solved, but while I continue to look for service guides or data sheets, we can try and do something useful, and that's to clean up the board so that it doesn't get any more damaged. I've used white vinegar here to get the rust off of the board, and it feels like we've caught this just at the right time. It all seems to be lifting off and is only on the surface. I couldn't see any obviously eaten tracks or damage to the board, and on the face of it I'm feeling quite positive about this board. The top of the board was quite grimy, so I gave that a good fingertip clean as well, and it's looking much healthier by the time we've finished. The final test today then is to determine if we can actually power the machine on even if we don't have a display, and that requires a suitable power source. The PSU expects 100 of your Japanese volts to be supplied, and according to the test points on the system board, we're expecting 12, -12 and 5 volts by the looks of things. This comes out of the PSU in the form of a 15-pin main connector, a connector for the fan, which is standard, we recognise that one, and a 5-pin auxiliary power connector which also plugs into the system board. This then is not the same as a standard AT power supply, and if it doesn't work we'll need to find the pinouts for the connectors so that we can send the right power supply to the board. With a new mains lead connected and a step-down transformer attached, I tested it out and we can see 110 volts going into the power switch and out of the switch into the board, but at the other end we've got nothing coming out of the PSU. Absolutely nothing. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because it could be that the power supply popped and so they disposed of the whole machine still in a perfectly good state. But that's where we'll stop today. So let's stop and review what other hurdles we may need to overcome to actually see this in action.
So there we go, that's an introduction to our Fujitsu PC. Fujitsu's premium business PC of the early 90s and late 80s. It's really nice to see how they put things together and the nuances and quirks that Fujitsu's had in their PCs of that period. Now there's a lot of challenges to get through, and I really appreciate any comments, insights or help that you can give down below in the comments section. Specifically, there's the CRT port. What can we plug into that? How can we get around that unusual port? And there's just more information to find out in general. All of those interesting expansion connectors in the board. What's the bus controller for that? I know later Fujitsu's had something called an R bus, which managed all that, and that was based around a RISC processor. I can't find what we've got in here. I'm sure with a bit more digging, with access to a few more data sheets, I can find out what all of those chips are and what they're doing. The power supply, we need to overcome that, but I don't think that will be such a major problem, because in the very worst case scenario, the housing for the power supply is big enough to squeeze a modern power supply into. So we can retain the original looks, but have a brand new power supply. We just need to figure out what the pinouts are to get power into the board. So lots more to find out. Will we see this computer again? It all depends on what information we can dig up. And as I said at the start of this video, I appreciate any help whatsoever that you can give us in finding out more information on it. Until then, I hope we see you again, and I hope we see this machine again. Thank you for watching, take care, and see you soon.
If you enjoy my content and would like to toss a coin into the hat to support the cave, then check out patreon.com/retromancave and join the official cave dwellers you can see on the screen now. Thank you for your support.